Hello everyone. Welcome to the ECO2 Smart Schools Climate Conference. My name is Hannah and I'm from Oases.
And I'm Joanne. We're really pleased to have you here today, and we're really interested to know who we've got listening and watching us. So if you want to pop your name or your school name and your country in the chat now, it will be great to do a bit of a shout out to all of the countries we've got represented.
I've just popped some instructions in the chat on how to mute notification sounds. So that means every time we publish something in the chat, you won't get a little ding. So you can do that through your settings. And don't worry if you're posting a comment and it doesn't appear straight away. We've got lots of comments to get through and publish. So yes, we'll get round to it at some point.
Excellent. And we're going to begin the conference now. If you lose us at any point in time, there is a red live button at the bottom of the screen. So if you click on that, you can join us in real time and be able to engage with all of the questions and the pledges that we've got coming up. We've got quite an exciting schedule ahead, so we're going to get straight to it.
The conference is being recorded, so don't worry if you miss any bits. You can view them later when we pop them on YouTube. We're going to pass over to Claire OMalley now.
Thank you, Hannah. Hello, everybody. I'm Claire OMalley. I have a strange title. It's a Pro Vice Chancellor Global. What that means is that for Durham University, I'm responsible for our international strategy across our research and education, our partnerships, and the programs that we develop in collaboration with other institutions across the world. I'm also very proud to welcome you on behalf of Durham University, Durham Energy Institute. This is one of our flagship world-leading research institutes. We have scientists, social scientists from across a huge range of subjects, all working together to understand how to combat climate change. And that's what brings us all together here. At Durham University, we pride ourselves in the extent of our global reach. We've got partnerships all over the world, including in the global south, in North America, in China, in India, in Africa, in Latin America, all working together with universities, with other organizations, with industry, and in our schools outreach to try and educate and carry out research and explain our research to people who might influence our governments in various countries around the world to combat climate change. We all know that just in a couple of weeks' time, we will be hosting in the United Kingdom the COP26 conference in Glasgow. And some of our researchers, some of whom you'll be speaking with today, will be attending that in person. And we've been engaging in lots of conferences, online seminars, schools outreach work in the run-up to this conference. Climate change affects us all. No matter how old you are, what your role is in terms of the work you do, the things you learn, the people you interact with. It's also obviously going to impact our future generations. We care passionately at Durham University to help people who will be influencing the climate change agenda in the future to understand the science and the social science that will make the right changes and have the right impact. So I'm really grateful to the partners that we've been working with on this initiative, to Durham County Council, to Oases, and I'm really looking forward to hearing your ideas and what you've been thinking about, your questions as we go through the conference. So I think that's it for me for now. I'm just super excited to be starting off the conference and looking forward to having conversations with you. It's a great opportunity for you to directly engage with our scientists and social scientists. So thank you very much. And over to the next speaker, who I believe is Councillor Mark Wilkes. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Councillor Mark Wilkes and I'm the portfolio holder for Neighbourhoods and Climate Change for Durham County Council, and I am delighted to be involved in this fantastic event helping young people and schools come together from around the world to share their ideas and learn from one another. Thank you so much for taking part in this. County Durham is a beautiful place full of heritage and fantastic landscapes, and it's our responsibility to ensure we look after it and enhance our environment for future generations. Durham County Council is committed to becoming a net zero organisation and to help County Durham as a whole become net zero by 2050 or earlier. We declared a climate emergency back in 2019, and we have committed significant funds to lower the carbon emissions of the council and also to work with partner organisations, businesses and residents to help them reduce their own emissions and to ensure we meet that target. Climate change objectives are now in every single job description for people working for Durham County Council, and we have created new structures such as a net zero board to drive the reduction in emissions. Education and learning for residents and young people is particularly important. We have a successful schools programme called ECO2 Smart Schools that has worked with schools in County Durham for over 10 years and helped them to significantly reduce their emissions and improve their knowledge about energy and climate change. It has its own dedicated website that provides great advice for teachers and other staff in schools. We are also about to launch a new website aimed at residents and visitors to the county called Climate Durham, and that will provide information, advice, tips and opportunities to collaborate and share ideas and learning. The climate crisis around the world is a big one, and it's crucial that we work together to change how we live in a fair way to ensure a positive future for people and the planet. Finally, I would like to thank the organisers of these conferences. It really is a team effort with support from a number of services with Durham County Council, plus invaluable support from the educational charity Oasis. Colleagues from Durham University have provided fantastic expertise, not only for today, but working with Oasis, developed a brilliant educational resource that I know all of you taking part in today have been using in the run-up to these conferences. So, without further ado, and I hope that you thoroughly enjoy the conferences, do participate and ask questions, and please provide your ideas, pledges, suggestions through the chat function when we ask you to. We want to hear from young people telling us what you think you can do, what you think we can do, what your schools should do, as well as what a council should do, and what our government should be doing, and what you'd like to see happen at the COP26 conference in Glasgow. I'd like now to pass across to Rich Hurst, Education Advisor at Durham, who is interviewing David Saddington, Head of Nature Campaigns Department at the Department for Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy for the UK Government. David has committed over half his life to climate change issues as a campaigner, working with organisations around the world, developing new ideas, solutions and campaigns. And hopefully, Richard won't get quite as disturbed as I'm getting out here in County Durham from all of the wildlife behind me. Take care.
Hi, David.
Hi, Richard.
Delighted that you can make it to our International Schools Conference here in Durham and with schools around the world. Thanks so much for sparing the time. David, your title, Head of International Nature Campaign for BEIS, what can you explain what that means and what you do?
Yeah, so it's a very exciting role. I think it's a bit of a dream job, actually, from my previous work as a teenage climate activist and being involved in climate change for so long. But yeah, my work is all around putting nature at the heart of COP26. It's been set out as a real priority by the Prime Minister and Zach Goldsmith, who is one of our ministers. I think for too long, nature, the importance of tackling deforestation, the importance of protecting peatlands, of course, planting more trees in the UK. This hasn't been actually a main focus of the climate change COP, so we really determined to put nature right at the heart of COP26, because we believe that, you know, we can't meet the goals of the Paris Agreement to get climate change under control unless we have serious action when it comes to nature, and in particular tackling deforestation. So a lot of my work is around trying to tackle deforestation, particularly in those areas like the Amazon, for example, in the Congo Basin, the rainforest in the middle of Africa, and in Southeast Asia.
Excellent. So it's a huge remit, isn't it? It's a huge amount of work that you and the rest of the teams around the world are working on. So you mentioned then about COP and COP26, and obviously lots of our young people involved in this conference will have heard about it and will learn a little bit about this idea of the conference of the parties. But could you kind of briefly explain what COPs, and then specifically what COP26 is doing?
Yeah, well, yeah, COPs actually started when in the year I was born, which is 1992, and so all of it started in Rio in Brazil, when all of the world got together at the Earth Summit, and they decided that climate change, biodiversity loss, and desertification were three global environmental challenges which the world needed to cooperate on. And in each of those areas, there's these conference of the parties, COPs, which happen sort of every year for climate change, every other year for biodiversity and diversification. So COP26 is the 26th meeting of all of those parties. Probably the most famous one to date was COP21 in Paris in 2015, and that gave birth to the Paris Agreement, which many of us know. So COP26 is 5 years on. Well, it's actually 6 years on, because of course we had the global pandemic. This should have taken place November 2020, but this will be the meeting 5-6 years on the Paris Agreement, when those nations get back together, look at how actually we're not quite yet stepping up to that global challenge of tackling climate change, and really challenging one another to go faster, to go further. And of course, businesses, civil society, schools are all part of that conversation around getting global leaders to step up.
And who are the kind of people then who attend COP events? You know, is it a really broad mix of people who are there?
Yeah, it's a really broad mix. So you have country ministers, you have heads of state, you have business leaders. It's increasingly sort of popular now with business leaders and CEOs. Over the last few years now, businesses are really switched on to the sustainability agenda, which is fantastic to see. And so many of them are now stepping up to lead and actually want that platform at COP to sort of showcase and inspire others. But there's also, which is so important, to have observers to the negotiations and the meetings. You have people there like WWF, like Greenpeace, organisations which represent Indigenous people from around the world. There's also a public zone of COP26 as well, because it's a really important part of COP to try and sort of inspire the people who are hosting the conference to actually, you know, to see the world come to that city, Glasgow in this case, and actually be inspired by some of the global solutions. So there are, there's public involved. You know, you see royalty as well. You know, we'll be expecting some royal faces at COP26, and you get a really sort of exciting range of people. Leonardo DiCaprio often sort of turns up and sort of gives some inspiring speeches. So it's really sort of a bit of a world fair of people coming together for a fortnight to tackle climate change. And
is all of it going to be done face to face this year, obviously, given where we are in terms of the pandemic?
So we are trying as much as possible to get people face to face in Glasgow. We think it's really important to have people come together, particularly after, you know, 18 months. Some of the really technical climate change negotiations which will happen in Glasgow are just really critical to do in person. A lot of this depends on relationships and sort of those sort of small meetings which you can have. I think we've done an incredible amount virtually over the past year and a half, but actually bringing people together is really important. for this. So we are hoping to have a lot of delegates come to Glasgow. We've been shipping out vaccines around the world to the various British embassies to help the key government officials and delegates coming from countries, you know, from Ghana to Indonesia to New Zealand, to make sure that they have sort of the right travel you know, passport. And we are also paying for quarantine hotels for people coming from red list countries as well, to make sure that we are trying to make sure copies as accessible as possible. That said, we will also be live streaming a lot of the events from COP26. So even if you can't make it up to Glasgow, there is an opportunity to follow the conversation, to see what world leaders are saying, to pose some of those questions, to be involved in the conversation, which I think is really exciting. And actually, I think this is something which, you know, as we all have seen how, you know, Zoom, how Teams, how all of these platforms can actually really help be more transparent and connect with people from around the world. So we are hoping that this will be a really transparent conference by having a lot of the events live streamed and broadcast outside of Glasgow. Fantastic. So it will hopefully be as inclusive as possible, and probably the most inclusive of any of the COPs so far. I imagine the difficulty is there's a huge amount of administration and organisation that goes behind it to try and do it with so many people coming from so many different places. David, then, if I can take you back, then obviously we've got lots of young people from around the world listening and watching this conference today. And you and I first met many years ago when you were a young man, still in school. So you're from the northeast area, originally northeast of England. Can you give a little bit of background then about what originally got you interested in terms of environmental and climate related issues? Yeah, absolutely. It was it feels a long time ago now, but I mean, so much has happened. Yeah, it was back in the summer of 2005 when I really had my first moment of experiencing climate change. It was I was on a day out in North Yorkshire with my parents, not, you know, about half an hour from my family home, and suddenly the heavens opened. There was torrential rain. And we were stuck in the middle of what was at the time one of the worst floods on record to hit the northeast of England. We couldn't get home, the roads were washed away, communities were flooded, and actually just, you know, being right at the heart of that devastation was just so impactful as a 13-year-old. And I remember when we eventually managed to get home about 4 o'clock in the morning or something, actually sort of switching on the TV just to see how this was being reported. And I remember there was a climate scientist, it was probably on ITV or something like that, talking actually how events like this would increase in frequency and severity because of climate change. And I didn't know what climate change was, and that really stuck with me. So I took it upon myself to learn more about climate change, to communicate that to my friends at school, you know, talking to my teachers, my geography teachers, and actually starting to get those conversations going around, you know, this issue, which was already affecting me and my home and my family and friends. So I thought it was such an important issue. And my geography teacher at the time from Blakeston School in Stockton, which is no longer there, sadly. It's a Lidl now, and a crematorium. But my geography teacher put me forward for a competition which was being run by the UK government, looking for 9 young people from around the UK to go out there to talk to the public about climate change. You know, why is this important? Why do we need to reduce our own emissions when it comes to, you know, to travel in our homes? What can we do? What can we all do to be more energy efficient, to reduce our carbon footprints? And I was selected to be part of that programme for the northeast of England, and it was a great privilege to do that. And at the end of the programme, after sort of touring around the country, having lots of these conversations, seeing how climate change was affecting these communities, I met with the then Prime Minister Tony Blair, and he asked me the question, you know, what would you do to scale this up? You talked to all of these people, you've talked to sort of young people, and I said, well, you know, climate change is clearly going to be such an important issue for my generation, for generations to come, but it needs to be on the school curriculum. And within a year, the UK was the first country in the world to formally introduce climate change onto school curriculum. So from that moment, I've gone on to support climate change communications work, education around the world with the British Council, with the We Are Family Foundation, which is based in America, and yeah, support the work of many other sort of activists and influencers from around the world. And then from there, my journey sort of led through working with the United Nations, working as a consultant with some global brands, and ultimately to today, heading up the nature work for COP26.
So it's been some journey, hasn't it? And along the way, and perhaps particularly for the students that are from Durham, might find that quite amazing that, you know, a northeast lad from an ordinary school in Tees Valley, not far from there, has had this opportunity where simply by being interested in starting to ask questions that you've then, as you said, met the then UK Prime Minister, you've then ended up now working for government. And then along the way, I guess, in terms of your studies and your interest then linked to what you then did at university. So obviously one of the key partners for this conference here at Durham University, and we've worked with lots of universities, that's where you studied. So was a key choice, I guess, from you to then want to do a degree in something that was of real interest to you?
Yeah, it absolutely was. I mean, I've always been really passionate about geography, and, you know, having that sort of that greater academic experience, you know, particularly in the world we live in at the moment, I think, you know, it's so important to actually know the facts and actually sort of get that academic experience to sort of to know what you're talking about, because, you know, you can only tackle these challenges, you can only make those informed choices if you actually know the science. So I chose Durham University to sort of further my work in this, particularly interested in, and did a lot of glaciology work in the department, going out to Iceland, seeing, you know, firsthand some of the impact of climate change, doing some of the studies on the melting glaciers. I think it was a really fantastic experience from the geography department over the 4 years. I stayed on to do a master's as well, looking at sort of climate risk, actually looking at sort of, you know, after I'd done the science, then looking at sort of how does climate change affect us from a sort of security and economic perspective. But yeah, a really good few years, and made sort of lots of great connections and friends as well throughout that journey.
And as I said, because we've got young people from all around the world, from schools all over the world watching us today, what would you be able to give them any advice in terms of if this is an area that they were really interested in, thought this is a career that I might want to get involved in? And of course, climate is such a broad area that there's a huge range of job roles and opportunities. But would you give them any specific advice in terms of how they might want to take it forward as a career?
I mean, I think the first, probably two things. I think the first thing is absolutely do it, because this is the next few decades. You know, actually not even that. You know, the next sort of decade. You know, this is where it needs to happen. It is the people who are, you know, the youth leaders now, you know, going into those jobs. It is people like me, which, you know, which need to sort of make this change happen. And this is truly historic. What we're talking on, sort of what we need to do within this next few years, it is completely sort of change how humanity has generated energy. You know, going back all the way to history, we have burnt things for energy. You know, actually what we're doing with fossil fuels is just a sort of, slightly more advanced version of what cavemen did in terms of, you know, burning wood for fuel. We just sort of, you know, stick coal in a giant sort of oven and sort of burn it for energy. And actually throughout all of history, we have been very reliant on fossil fuels for energy, and that needs to completely change within the next few years. You know, we need to transform every sector of the economy, because carbon is just embedded in everything we do, from, you know, from lighting our rooms to moving around cities. And the work I do is on food systems. So, you know, the food system needs to be completely transformed to actually, you know, not have high carbon in it in terms of cutting down trees. So, and all of these challenges, every sector of the economy, every business needs to completely radically change within the next few years. And that's really daunting, but it's also quite exciting, because when I was at Durham University, and the careers department really didn't know what to do with sort of sustainability. You know, this wasn't even that much of a thing, you know, a few years ago, but now most businesses are now waking up to this. And actually, I would really encourage people to follow their passion in terms of, you know, what interests you, because there is a sustainability job now in every industry. You know, there are sustainable wedding planners, there are sustainable engineers, there are sustainable aviation technicians. You know, you can approach any sector of the economy, any job from a sustainability perspective. And what we really need, if we are to step up to this global emergency, is the activists, the innovators, entrepreneurs in all of those systems. So I'd encourage everyone, you know, regardless of where they go in their career, just to sort of to step up with that sustainability climate mentality, because we need this leadership in all of the spaces. So I think, yeah, my advice would be to absolutely do it. And then secondly, don't be restrained by the current sort of, I guess, don't be sort of too drawn to the word sustainability or climate in the job description, because every job now needs to sort of embrace yeah, the low carbon mentality if we are to step up to this global challenge.
Yeah, absolutely. Couldn't agree with you more. And I think in terms of scale, it's in any job, in any role, or even if you're just volunteering in your community or anything, every individual person can make a difference, can't they? And I think that's the key thing. And as you said, just get on and do it. That's absolutely great. David, thank you very much for your time. We're going to come back to you a little bit later on and be putting some of the questions from our young people to you. But for now, thank you very much, and we'll speak to you shortly.
Thanks, Richard.
So interesting.
Hello, my name is Evelyn Teherani, and I'm from Durham Energy Institute, which is the hub of energy research at Durham University. And I'm delighted to welcome the expert panel for today, who you'll be asking your questions of. And I want to invite the panelists to give a brief introduction about what their focus is. And if we start with Chris here.
Hi everybody, my name is Professor Chris Stokes and I work in the Geography Department at Durham University, and I'm a scientist who studies the frozen parts of the Earth's planet, like the Arctic and Antarctica, and looks at how they're responding to climate change.
Simone.
Hi everyone, my name is Simone Abram. I'm a professor in anthropology and I study and teach everything to do with energy and society.
And Maggie.
Hi everybody, I'm Maggie Bosenket and I work for Durham County Council. You heard Councillor Mark Wilkes just before saying how important climate change is. It's the most important thing we've got to tackle, and we've all got to do what we can. So that's my job and I'm very lucky to have that job.
And Heather?
Hi everyone, my name is Henna and I'm a maths and engineer researcher at Durham University. I focus on offshore wind and I solve fun maths problems to design the future offshore wind farms.
And Douglas?
Hello everyone, I'm Douglas Halliday. I work in the physics department at Durham University and my research interest is looking at solar cells and...
Thank you. And now back to the OASIS team.
We are coming.
Hi, wow, what an exciting panel we've got here today. I know they're so excited to answer your questions. So now it's over to you. In the top right hand corner of your screen, you'll see some little speech bubbles with a question mark in. If you click on that, you can post your question into the chat. If you could post your question and please also include your first name and country as well.
And whilst you're posting your questions, we're going to feed back to David Saddington, who you met just a bit ago, and he's going to answer some of the more common questions that you've been giving to us as part of the work that you've been doing through the ECO2 Schools Climate Conference. So it's over to David and Richard again.
Hi, David.
Hi again.
Thanks that you. Great that you can join us again. Now, so this section we're going to ask some questions that some of the children from schools in County Durham have sent through to us. that they'd like you to answer. So the first one, which is from Greenland Primary School, has said, has COVID-19 helped to slow climate change in any way?
Oh, that's a good, very topical question. So a bit of a mixed answer on this one, I think. So a little bit, sadly not very much, unfortunately, because as everyone know, everyone was sort of locked down in their homes for a long time, but actually a lot of industry kept going, particularly in China, for example, in sort of some of these countries around the world. A lot of industry kept going. I think some of the biggest savings we saw was in transport. So people weren't flying, people weren't driving and moving their cars. So we did see a little bit of a drop, but unfortunately a lot of the economic sort of recovery, as soon as everyone is sort of free from lockdown, it's sort of going back to sort of how it was before. So we had a little bit of a sort of lull, I would say, but sadly sort of not as much as it's not going to be long lasting. One of the real benefits, though, I think, was what we have seen, particularly in cities, in London, where I am at the moment, is that we've seen much cleaner air. And this has been true from London to Delhi. And I think there's a real sense that people don't want to go back to that old world. And actually, because we have now seen a different vision for how cities can be cleaner, how people can, cycle around. I myself have bought a bike in London. Previously, I didn't feel that safe cycling in London. But now, since the pandemic, because so many people like me, want to take active transport rather than even like using the tube, for example, councils have been installing bike lanes, introducing sort of lower emission zones. So I think there's a real positive vision here that actually some of the cleanness and clean air like we've seen because of the lockdown actually has shown people that things can be different, and actually inspired people to actually sort of demand some of those changes, which I think is really important.
Yeah, and I'd add to that, I think obviously we've embraced technology, haven't we? So how we're having this meeting now, that, as you say, you're in London, I'm up in Durham, and we don't have to actually travel to each other. We can use technology when it's appropriate and use it for its best purpose.
Absolutely. So I think hopefully we will sort of, some of those longer lasting changes, hopefully we can continue to drive down emissions if we actually keep some of the benefits of lockdown, while of course getting rid of some of the rubbish bits, like not being able to see family members when we want to.
Yeah, absolutely. Excellent, thank you. Second question, and again this is from Greenland Primary, is one that's saying, how are we going to sort out climate change in countries where they don't have much money? So where, for those countries, those developing countries and so on, how can the world help those countries?
Yeah, so this is part of COP26. It was sort of set out in the Paris Agreement that globally each year sort of there will be 100 billion in finance sort of to support developing countries to adapt to climate change, to help reduce their emissions, and ultimately to have that sort of that sustainable development. And we do need to keep the pressure on countries to meet that target, and that is one of the key objectives of COP26, making sure that we do have that finance committed and it actually is reaching those countries. What is really encouraging though, I think in some countries where I've previously worked, I did a lot of work in Nigeria, for example, in my previous role as a consultant, there's actually so many communities are going sort of leapfrogging where we were in like the Industrial Revolution. So they're going straight from having sort of no electricity, for example, in a village, to actually having solar panels on their roof. We just order them from Amazon and get them sort of shipped in and stick them on the roof, and at no point they were connected to a electricity network which was powered by coal, for example. And I think this is really encouraging. We're seeing the same. If you go on holiday around the world, you might have seen this in some developing countries. Loads of people have mobile phones, but at no point they did have the phone in the hall, for example, which was prevalent in the 90s. And actually I think by encouraging these leapfrog technologies, I think this is some of the best ways which we can help those countries adapt to climate change and also reduce their emissions.
Yeah. Excellent, thank you for that. Another question, and sort of linked, is one then specifically about children, and saying how can we all help children in other countries who are beginning to see the worst impacts of climate change?
I mean, one of the key things to do here is to really reduce our own emissions, because that is the best thing we can do, you know, to help those children in those countries, to help the world. A lot of the global emissions come from communities like ours. You know, in terms of globally, there's not a huge amount of emissions which come from developing countries. A vast amount comes from Europe, from the US, from Australia, from the Middle East, from China, for example. But if you take that down to per person emissions, countries like China actually aren't that bad. Countries like Australia are pretty bad. So the more we can do to reduce our own emissions, you know, making those family choices around, you know, getting an electric car, for example, rather than a petrol and diesel one, actually making sort of, you know, eating less meat every week, making some of those conscious choices, reducing our own emissions are some of the best things that we can do to help the world, because globally, yeah, we in Europe, in America, in those sort of countries contribute a huge amount per person to emissions, and that is, we need to radically change that within the next few years if we are to keep climate change within safe limits.
Excellent, thank you. And I should say that question was from Copeland Road Primary School. And the next one now, which is more of a nature-related question, is a specific one from Copton Hill Jr. is asking what happens to all, or what will happen to all of the fish if coral dies?
Yeah, it's really scary what's happening in our oceans because of climate change. So oceans are a carbon sink, which means they absorb carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, and this has actually helped slow down global warming over the last few decades. But now the ocean carbon sinks are getting more saturated, and that means that they've become more acidic. So they have actually absorbed the carbon dioxide from the air, but turn that into a mild acid, and it's actually sort of the warming of the oceans and that they're becoming more acidic that's what's killing the corals where a lot of fish live. The Great Barrier Reef, you might have seen, is in real sort of dire situation, and of course if we don't manage to turn this around, the habitats of a lot of fish, a lot of, you know, key marine, you know, like turtles, for example, yeah, it will be destroyed, which is very, very sad.
But people do have some solutions, don't they, in terms of looking at trying to regenerate coral and various others, so that it's not that it's a lost cause. There are opportunities, but as you say, we need to reduce our emissions to be able to give the oceans a fighting chance.
Yeah, absolutely, we do. There's opportunities to restore some of those corals, but I think the key issue is that we do need to sort of, get emissions as low as possible, because if we don't have cooler oceans, then that's going to be really challenging for a lot of fish and marine species.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. So certainly something we need to act on quickly. Two questions now, both of these are from St Joseph's Primary. So this one's saying, what can children do to make the biggest difference in terms of climate change?
I think the biggest thing that children can do is actually sort of be loud about this and actually demand change. So many people now listen to children, and I actually think, you know, particularly with the power of technology now, you know, children today, you know, people listen to this as some of the most empowered children in all of history, because you have access to TikTok, to Instagram, to all of these sort of platforms where actually you can call out brands, you can say, you know, you're not doing enough, we want you to do more, we're not happy that, you know, our chicken is contributing towards deforestation or whatever it might be, you know, we're not happy that you're using single-use plastics in your supermarket, and actually calling out these companies and being that very loud voice for change, I think is one of the most important things children can do, as well as, of course, sort of pestering their own parents to make those low carbon choices in the home around eating less meat, for example, you know, investing in electric cars, switching your energy tariff over to a green supply, for example, all of these sort of great things that we can all do. But I think, just being that really loud voice for change, I think is go out and pester.
Yeah, excellent. Use your voice as loudly as you can. And just one final one. Then we talked in the first interview about COP26, obviously in Glasgow in early November. Have you got one sort of key change that you would like to see happen at COP26?
So the key thing for me from the nature space is actually tackling deforestation, because this of course affects the habitat of so many wildlife around the world. When we talk about tropical forests, we're talking about the habitats of, you know, orangutans, of jaguars. So from a background which I, you know, deeply care about climate change, but also the habitats of these animals, I really want to see the world stepping up to end deforestation from food products. So for COP26, we have set up something called the FACT dialogue, the Forest, Agricultural and Commodity Trade Dialogue, and this is to bring together the largest importers and exporters of food products, actually to agree that we need to end deforestation from food. So I'm really hopeful that that group of 30 countries will come together and actually agree a plan where we can work together and make sure that our food isn't contributing towards deforestation, to save places like the Amazon, the Congo Basin, and the forests in Indonesia, for example. So for me, I think that's a real key outcome I want to see, but there's so much happening on the coal space and the transport space, so there's action needs to happen in all of these. But for me, I think it's really around sort of that really strong signal that, you know, this is not acceptable anymore. We don't want our food to contribute towards deforestation, and a really united voice from governments, from businesses, to say this is going to end within the next few years and we need to work together to make that happen.
Excellent. David, we wish you very well with that, and thank you very much for your time today, and we hope that you're successful at COP. Thanks very much.
Thanks, bye.
And I'll grab these ones. Did we have these?
Welcome back to the expert panel at Durham University, and we're really looking forward to answering all your questions that have been coming in. I believe that Joanne and Hannah will be telling us your questions, and then choose the panelists to answer.
Thank you so much for all your fantastic questions that you submitted. We had hundreds and hundreds of them through, so we've got a fantastic list to ask to the panel here. So Joe's going to start off.
Okay, the first question that we've got has come from India, and it's very pointed. It's, will animals and humans die from climate change?
Chris, if you'd like to answer that.
Yeah, I can answer that question. Actually, I would say that it's not will, but actually they perhaps already have. There are extreme climate events that can do a lot of damage to both animals and humans. One example would be prolonged and intense heat waves. That's periods of time where the temperatures get really, really hot. And we know that those events are becoming more frequent and more intense. And so already scientists have been able to attribute, unfortunately, they've been able to identify that some deaths are already taking place due to climate change.
Great, thank you. A question, we think, for Simone. What is more problematic, climate change or poverty?
That is a really great question. Of course, the two are linked, because some of the worst effects of climate change are happening to the people who are least able to deal with them, either because they're in an area that's most effective, or because they don't personally have the resources to deal with the kind of change that's required. So I don't think we should choose one of them as being more important, but they're both really important. And the main thing we have to think about when we're thinking about how we address climate change is how to do it without, at the very worst, without making it worse for people who are in poverty, but ideally making it better for the people who are suffering the most. So we want to create a just transition. That means a fair transition, not just a transition that helps the globe carry on as it is, but one that makes life better for everybody.
Thank you, Simone. We're going to ask this next question, which is from Newcastle Primary in the UK, to Maggie, if that's okay. And I think this question has taken inspiration from Greta Thunberg, and they said, will COP26 help, or will it just be more blah, blah, blah?
Oh, what a brilliant question. And you're right, there's so much blah, blah, blah. And it's down not just to COP26, but down to all of us and what everybody does. And I'm glad that you mentioned Greta Thunberg, because when you think of all of you in your schools, Greta Thunberg was just an ordinary girl in an ordinary school, and she got so upset about climate change that she just went and sat outside her city hall and just sat there protesting until people began to take notice. And now the whole world knows her name. So what you can all do, every one of you, makes a huge difference. COP26, they're doing all the discussions now. Very important people getting in rooms somewhere behind where we can't see them and thinking about what we can do. There are some really committed, passionate people there who want to make a difference. There are also some people who are very greedy and selfish and want to carry on the way they always have done. And let's carry on selling things and making money and using oil and coal and gas because that's easy and it's nice. Will it make a difference? Yes, it will. How much difference will it make? I don't know. But the most important thing, and as David Staddington already said, is keep shouting, keep making a noise. If every one of us in this room, in this event, and every one of us around the world keeps shouting about climate change, people have to take notice and they have to do something about it.
Thank you, Maggie. Our next question is from Cesson in France, and they ask, do you think individual actions and commitments can impact climate change all that much?
This is a really good question, because lots of people think, in fact, one of my students yesterday said to me, what's the point in me doing things for climate change when none of my family or friends are doing anything? And my answer to her was that if you do something, they will notice. And if your friends then say, well, maybe I should do that as well, then that's more people making changes. And eventually that's the way that change happens. So it always starts with one person saying, I want to do things differently. So even though that one person's actions in the like here and now, they make a tiny, tiny difference, in the longer term, over a few weeks, a few months, a few years, they make a huge difference. So I think it's important to remember that we don't just act alone. We influence our friends, we influence other people, and it's really important to stick to what you believe in and act on what you believe in.
I think it's also worth noting that it was lots of small actions by individuals that has also contributed to the problem. So we're really asking people in some ways just to roll back the actions that they've already taken.
Okay, next question is from Durham Federation, and it's quite specific. It says, how can we reduce the spread of forest fires?
Okay, I can take this one. So, I mean, forest fires have actually occurred on Earth naturally for thousands of years, but what we've seen in the last few decades is that because of global warming, they're becoming more frequent and more widespread. So this is a problem you may have seen, particularly in parts of the Arctic where there's been forest fires that have never really taken place before. What can we do to deal with that? Well, it's all part really of the same issue. We need to try and reduce the emission of greenhouse gases, which are causing the global warming, those polluting greenhouse gases in the atmosphere that are leading to global warming. We need to try and reduce those, and that should help get rid of some of the worst effects of climate change. Forest fires, of course, has been just one example of lots of different effects of climate change.
Thank you. Our next question from Durham and India as well, probably for Douglas or Henna. How can we make solar panels more efficient, and how can the costs be reduced?
Thank you, that's a great question, and that's one of the areas that I spend a lot of time thinking about. So what a solar panel does is it converts the energy of sunlight or light directly into electricity, and it does it using materials called semiconductors, which some of you may have heard about. And these materials are present in lots of electronic components and computers and phones. And so the way that we want to try and improve the efficiency of solar cells is to make the purity of the material better so that it has a higher conversion efficiency. We're also interested in looking for new materials that have not yet been identified that might potentially be used to manufacture solar cells at lower cost. So I think the main challenge that we have for solar energy is finding ways of increasing the efficiency of the devices so you get more electrical power out, but also looking at ways of using materials and elements and raw sources that are lower cost. So that will help to reduce the cost of the solar cell, and that would encourage more people to adopt the technology more quickly.
Thank you, Douglas. Right, we're going to go from solar panels to animals. And I know from all of the work that we do with schools here in the UK that animals are often at the heart of the issue for children in terms of climate change. And we've got quite a lot of questions coming in today from around the world, which is asking, how will climate change affect animals on this planet?
Yeah, I could do a quick. I could just give you one example, actually. One of my, I've been working with a PhD student who's been looking at reindeer in the north of Sweden and Finland. And reindeer are not really tame, they're wild animals, and the herders go along with them and follow them around the tundra. And they eat a kind of moss or lichen that grows on the ground. And in the winter, they dig through the snow to get at the food that's underneath the snow. What's been happening in recent years is that because the temperature is more unreliable, you quite often get warm periods in the winter and the snow melts and then it goes cold again and it freezes. And if that happens several times, you get a thick layer of ice and the reindeer can't get through the ice to get to their food. And that means that they've got nothing to eat. So that's a really direct way that climate change affects animals. But at the same time, it might be possible for reindeers to eat slightly different things. So some kinds of mushrooms might grow a bit more that they like to eat and they might find an alternative source. But actually the biggest threat to reindeers across the north of Europe is development. So the more roads, the more mines, even the more railways that are built, they interrupt the pastures that the reindeer roam over. So it's not just climate change that's a challenge to animals, it's all of the things which eventually cause climate change, which have an immediate effect as well as the long-term climate effect. So there's a lot of different things going on, I think, in livelihood for animals.
Thank you. Our next question is from India. And it's, how can we help the people who can't afford to use renewable energy sources such as wind power?
Should I do that? Yes, okay. There are lots of different kinds of renewable energy, and in some of the poorest countries, there's renewable ways of using animal droppings and our waste to burn things instead of using fossil fuels. So there's lots of different things that we can do. You're right that wind and tidal power and so can be very expensive. But the point is, once we've built them and put them in place, then they just keep working. I've got solar panels on my house. They've been there for more than 10 years now. And every year they make a huge amount of electricity and it doesn't cost me a penny. And I don't pay for electricity from the electricity companies. So it costs more money up front, but in the long term, it saves a lot of money. And we need the policymakers, the councils, the governments around the world to urgently put money up front to put the right renewable energy in place so that we can all use it. It shouldn't be every individual person. It should be down to governments really investing the money and brilliant people at universities doing the research to find the best, cheapest ways of making the renewable energy as well.
Great, thank you. We've got a question from the UK, and it's how quickly is climate change happening?
Okay, that's a really good question, thanks. Climate change is happening very quickly. If we look to what the Earth temperature was maybe 100 years ago, temperatures have increased by about 1.5 degrees, and they are predicted to continue to increase over the next century by at least that. And you might think that's not very much, but you have to remember that there are parts of the Earth with lots of ice in the form of glaciers, and when that ice melts, it only takes sometimes just 1 degree or 2 degrees, and that ice melts, it flows into the rivers, which flows into the oceans and causes sea level rise. So even very small changes in temperature can lead to quite big changes on the Earth's surface. So we're seeing already glaciers shrinking, we're seeing deserts get drier, we're seeing forests get drier. So you have to remember that very small temperature changes cause quite radical changes on the Earth's surface. And one of the things that David mentioned before was the Paris Climate Agreement, where governments signed up to say that they would do their best to limit the warming to 1.5 to 2 degrees by the year 2050, so in about 30 years' time. And most scientists agree, just to be hopeful, that if we can limit the warming to less than 2 degrees, we will be able to avoid some of the worst consequences of climate change.
Thank you, Chris. Now, this question has been put in from, I want to say, France? Anyway, it's been put in and it follows nicely on from what you were just talking about, because they're asking how might the Earth's temperature change in the future? And I know from the IPCC reports they do scenarios, so could you perhaps outline what you think your predictions are for the future?
Well, I actually have some of the numbers in front of me here, because this is a question that we're often asked, is how bad or how hot could it get? And of course, the answer is that it partly depends on how much or how many greenhouse gases we continue to emit into the atmosphere. So if we were to stick to the Paris Agreement, then we would hopefully be looking at somewhere around about 2 degrees Celsius of warming by the year 2100. That's in about 80 years' time, so hopefully within many of your lifetimes. But if we carried on at the same rate that we're emitting fossil fuels and greenhouse gases, or burning fossil fuels and emitting greenhouse gases at the moment, we could be looking at between 3 and 6 degrees Celsius by 2100. And that is a mean temperature. Within your lifetimes, within many of your lifetimes, we could see maybe up to 5 or 6 degrees of warming. I just want to make another really important point, is that that is an average temperature across the Earth, but depending on where you live on the Earth, it could be much warmer than that or slightly cooler than that. So I know we've got schools from all over the world today, and there are parts of the world that are likely to get much hotter than that average. So parts of the Arctic, and particularly parts close to the equator, are likely to get much hotter than other parts of the world. So that 5 or 6 degrees is a worst case scenario, but it could be even worse depending on where you live on the planet.
Thank you, Chris. And following on from that question, we've had a school in Tanzania ask, how can we prevent climate change in Tanzania as it is already very hot here?
Yes, that's difficult because none of us know Tanzania well enough to feel that we're qualified to answer. But I think it's the same everywhere, really. It's about getting your government to and your companies in your country to sign up to producing less greenhouse gas. That's the main headline, really, and that's the main thing that we all need to do. So it's hard to tell you specifically.
I could add in, so we have some research happening in Tanzania, which is to design wind turbines that work better in Tanzanian soils, because at the moment a lot of the wind turbines, and perhaps it's the same for solar panels, aren't designed for the specific context around the world. So we do have a project that's focusing on that, and also on changing the planning regulations in Tanzania. So we have engineers working with government representatives in Tanzania and communities to design wind turbines that are fit in the geographical context, but also they need to change the way that governments make decisions about where those wind turbines can go. And I think that the results from this research and the engagement that has been in this research shows that there will be a lot more investment in Tanzania into solutions such as wind turbines.
If I can just add as well, I think we need to remember that each country isn't on their own, and that what we do in a different country will affect other countries, and so we have to work together to find a solution for everyone.
And if I can add as well, I think that's really important, and we know that hot countries are going to get hotter. Trees have a really important role to play in making places cooler and in storing carbon dioxide and making the world a little bit better. So if there are any trees that you think will grow locally, try and plant some yourself or get other people to plant them and look after them so that they stay alive. I think that's really important too.
Okay, we're not live. Thank you for that panel. We got a very comprehensive answer there. Hopefully lots of ideas to take away. The next question I would like to direct to Maggie in the first instance, and it's from Dan in the UK. And he says, when did we first notice climate change was becoming a big problem?
Oh, that's a really interesting question, because I was one of the early campaigners back in the 1980s. The very first people to identify it, well more than 100 years ago, but everybody ignored them and just thought they were silly. Much more recently, scientists, since about the 1980s, have been discovering these problems. They've been going to the Arctic and finding that things aren't how they should be. And other scientists saying, well, of course they're not. Of course the ice is melting. Of course the sun's getting through and burning things, because we are emitting greenhouse gases, which we know what the science is, and we know that they stay in the atmosphere and they trap heat. So we've known the science. I started as a campaigner in 1989. I'd been terrified since 1985. That's when I first started reading it. And I wasn't the first. I'm going to say from about 1980-ish, we've known. And if we'd really taken action as a world then, things would be very different. It's taken a long, long time. But the change now is that almost everybody, and this is a global conference, people around the world now know that climate change is real. We're seeing it in our own countries. We're seeing the changes locally. So now it really is time. We've got to make a difference. And all of you, the young people, I'm sorry about the mess that we older people have made. We really have made a mess, but it's down to you to solve it. So yeah, 30, 40, 50 years, and we've got to act now.
Thank you. And so it's over 5 years on from when the Paris Agreement was made at COP21 in Paris. And we've had a question from Sedgefield in the UK. Are there consequences as a country if you don't keep to the Paris Agreement?
Okay, so there isn't a kind of list of punishments, unfortunately. So in that sense, there are no kind of formal penalties or punishments for countries that don't agree. But I think some of the things we've been talking about today are where countries should face pressure, and that will be from young people speaking out, from society holding their governments to account and saying, look, you made this pledge, things aren't happening as quickly as we want them to, and we want to campaign to change the way we're doing things in this country. So whilst I don't think there are any formal punishments, there should be a lot of pressure from society and from the people who care to speak up and ensure that those governments are held to account.
Some governments also, they take the agreement, they take the pledge that they've made to the conference and they turn it into legislation. So they commit as a government, our country is going to achieve this target by these means. And then, of course, they can be taken to court if they don't produce, they can be held up for, you know, when an election comes around, there can be political pressure on them to agree. So there are lots of different ways that COP26 does make a difference. And not least, if they stand up in public and pledge something and then they don't do it, it's very difficult for them to carry on in power. So it's kind of, it's not very direct, but there is a lot of pressure that goes with holding these big global events where everyone's watching. But it does make a difference.
Hi, thank you, Chris and Simone. So thank you, Chris and Simone, for that. And the next question has come from a few different schools. A lot of children in India are very concerned about this, and it follows on from what you're saying. In that their question is all about time. So if we act now, if we start using renewable energy, if we start putting things into effect, how much time does that buy us?
Okay, so there's lots and lots of computer simulations looking at how the climate might change in the future if things get too hot, or indeed if we're really good and we're able to say keep to the Paris Climate Agreement. And what those model simulations show is that we are already committed to around about 20 to 30 years of warming that will take place gradually, even if we stopped everything tonight. There are systems on the Earth that mean that there will still be some warming. But after 2 or 3 decades, temperatures should begin to cool again. Okay, so the great news is that this is a reversible process. We've taken it in one direction, we've created more greenhouse gases that has warmed the Earth, but if we can stop emitting those greenhouse gases and let them be slowly reabsorbed back into the Earth's surface, if you like, then it will reverse and we will start to cool again. So we're looking, just in short, to warm for another perhaps 10, 20, 30 years. But if we can keep to the Paris Climate Agreement, it will then stop. If we can then keep going into a situation where we start to remove carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, then we will start to slowly cool again.
Thank you. We've got a question all about cars now. So the first part is, could hydrogen cars become a main form of transport in the future?
And the second part from a different school says, are electric cars totally environmentally friendly? So I guess what we're asking the panel is, what's our transport going to look like in the future?
Okay, so I can start with this one and then other people can jump in. So about whether electric cars are totally environmentally friendly, I think we need to think about it in terms of 3 phases. So first of all, what goes into producing that vehicle? How much energy do we need to first make it? Secondly, what type of fuel does it run on? And so we can address the kind of carbon dioxide that's released from that in that stage, so by looking at using renewable energy to power it, or maybe hydrogen. And then I guess in the final stages, at some point later in that car's lifetime, it will be no longer wanted. And what do we do with that end product, with that technology? So there's 3 different stages there. In terms of, I saw a lot of questions about transport, and so, you know, at the moment, a lot of people own their own cars, and so we should probably look to other mechanisms, other ownership structures, maybe shared ownership, public transport, and see how those might improve our carbon footprint.
Yeah, there's no doubt that public transport is more energy efficient than private cars. But in the questions around which is better between hydrogen and electric cars, again, you've got obviously the making of them and the disposing of them. But if you just look at them in use, they're probably quite similar, but it depends how you power how you generate the electricity. If you generate the electricity from a coal power station, it's not ideal, is it? And also the same with hydrogen. If you make hydrogen from water, it's really clean and there's no carbon, there's no greenhouse gases at all. If you make it out of methane or natural gas, then you've still got to deal with the CO2 from that process. So yeah, you could maybe capture it and bury it, but the ideal is to produce it from renewable energy. So there's lots of slightly more subtle questions around here. There's no like a single clear answer, yes, buy an electric car. It's a little bit more complicated when you think in the long run, but definitely electric and hydrogen are better than running diesel. Yeah, that's definitely the case.
And I think the work we've done as well in Durham, we've been looking at this, and for the bigger vehicles, if you want a big lorry, you can't power them by electric at the moment. So hydrogen is probably the only solution for the big heavy vehicles. But of course, again, the clever scientists are working all the time and they might come up with solutions. Absolutely agree with everybody. If we've all got our own individual cars, that's never going to be environmentally friendly. It can't be. But electric cars are better than diesel or petrol cars. And if you've got an electric car and you're lucky enough to be able to have solar panels on your house as well, so that you can use the renewable energy, then that's probably the best we're going to get at the moment, and get a little car, not a big car.
Yeah, we could just tell you as well that we're about to start testing some hydrogen-powered delivery lorries here in the area. So in about a year's time, we'll be able to tell you how well that went and whether we're going to expand that.
And we're going to get some things called cargo bikes as well, which are bikes with big trailers on the back, and you can do the local deliveries from shops to people's houses without any fossil fuels at all.
Yeah, I guess in terms of transport, walking and cycling is probably best, then you get a lot of fresh air.
Yeah, and you stay slim.
Exactly.
Great, so there's lots of exciting things ahead then. We've got our final question, and it's really great that so many schools want to now take action. So they're asking, within our school, what can we do to help right now?
I think you're the experts to tell them on that, because that's what you do all the time, isn't it? You help schools to know what to do and which steps are most important for them. So maybe you should answer this question.
I knew that was going to come back to us. Start by looking at your energy, switching things off whenever you can and wherever you can. I was talking to a head teacher this morning who was laughing because her eco group were being so efficient. She came into her room and found her computer switched off.
And think about how you get to school as well. So if there's a possibility for you to walk or to take public transport or on your bike or scooter instead of going in an individual car, that's a great change that you can make.
Another thing that we can all do, and quite easily, is just stop buying so much, because every time you purchase something, it's got to be made, it's got to be transported, it's got to be mined. And so if we all stop buying so much, or really think about whether we need these things, we will make a massive impact. Okay, I'm afraid that's it for our questions. That's all we have time for, but we are not going to leave you hanging. If you have popped a question in the post, what we're going to do is we're going to take all of your questions from this conference and from last week. We're going to pose them all to the panel. They're going to give us the answers, and then we're going to put them on the ECO2 Smart Schools website. So if you've popped a question up there, go onto that website and find out the answer.
So we need to say a huge thank you to the panel and to all of you for submitting such interesting questions. That was a fantastic panel session. We're now inviting you to come up with a pledge and send it through using the chat. So making a pledge is like making a promise to yourself to take action. So for example, you might pledge to plant a tree every year on your birthday. Or you might pledge to tell your family all about climate change and how you can take action. So to send through your pledge, in the top right-hand corner, you'll see those speech bubbles with the question mark. Click on that, and then you can type in your pledge. Please remember to include your first name and your country if you can.
And whilst you're getting on with your pledges, we're going to show you a PowerPoint, because whilst you've been doing your work for the ECO2 Schools Climate Conference, you've been sending us some images and some inspiration, and we've popped them together so that we can share them with you all to give you a few bits of ideas for your pledges. Hello. Sorry, we were very busy there.
Yeah, thank you so much for submitting all your pledges so far. We've got some really, really interesting ones through.
For example, Suman in India has pledged that they will reduce the usage of household appliances which emit CFC gases. And I thought this was particularly good because we always tend to focus on carbon dioxide, but actually there's lots of other greenhouse gases, and CFC gases are actually far more potent in the atmosphere than carbon. So well done, Suman.
We've also had Dickens class in Coxo in the UK. They pledged to set up their own eco club to monitor the energy use in school, which is fantastic. So please keep your pledges coming through during the next section. We'll be noting all of them down so we can create a pledge page on the ECO2 Smart Schools website.
And if you want to share them, your pledges, we really encourage you to do so and to encourage other people to take climate action. And the best way to do this, we found, is to use social media. So if you're popping anything out on social media, please use the hashtag ECO2COP, all in uppercase.
I'll pop that in the chat so that you can remember it. We're now going to move on to the very exciting photography competition. And you were asked to submit either an image of concern that showed your thoughts and feelings about climate change, or an image of hope that shows actions that you, your family, or your school are taking against climate change. We were so impressed with all the entries that we received that we felt we couldn't possibly judge it ourselves. So we had to bring in two fantastic wildlife photography experts to do the judging for us, Oliver Sherratt and Brian Matthews.
And Brian and Oliver are here now to introduce themselves.
Hi, my name is Brian Matthews. Alongside Oliver, I've been asked to judge the climate conference photo competition. I'll be particularly focusing on the international images, but the guys at the conference asked me to do a little bit of an introduction to, I guess, why I've been asked to do this. So, as I said, my name is Brian Matthews. I've been working as a wildlife photographer for about 20 years, focusing mainly on wildlife, nature and conservation issues around the world. My job as a photographer, I see it as taking images that make people stop, look at the image, think, and then care a little bit, and even perhaps change their actions or do something different as a result of the images. I've been trying to capture the cause, solutions and impacts of climate change alongside the wildlife we share the planet with. In the UK, we have a huge history of an industrial past that has put this relatively small island in an incredibly privileged position. And as that changes and the sort of sunset drops on the, in this case, in our steelworks, it's important to sort of capture that imagery to make sure that we don't forget that we have an industrial past. There's many things that human beings do to cause climate change, like burn coal to create electricity. But there's many positive stories around wildlife living alongside industry with a little bit of cleanup and a little bit of thought. It's surprising how resilient wildlife and nature can be. We've also spent a lot of time looking at solutions, and I spend a big chunk of my photography out in the field looking at those solutions, be it offshore wind farms and nuclear power stations, or mitigating climate change by reducing the CO2 emissions as we use electricity. It's really important to try and capture the people, like Laura here standing on a nearly 100-metre high wind turbine as part of the maintenance work in Scotland, just to give that link between the green, clean future and the people that do it, and hopefully inspire a few people to follow in Laura's shoes. The impact can be quite hard to look at and to photograph. This is a simple example of a seabird in the UK called northern gannet, and you can see in every single nest is plastic debris, mainly fishing debris. as they collect material to build the nest at the beginning of the year. The bulk of it, unfortunately, is plastic. The retreating glaciers, most glaciers are suffering the same fate all around the world, and being able to capture that harsh retreat is really important, particularly if you revisit an area and have to hike another 2 kilometres to get to the foot of the glacier. And then the wildlife that lives alongside us in many of the ecosystems of the world. This little orangutan hopefully makes you smile a little bit, but the story behind it, of course, is that her home is surrounded by oil palm plantations. So while you've got a cute little picture of an orangutan, you've also got a bigger story. And of course, deforestation isn't restricted into Asia, and it's across the whole world, and in this case in Europe and Finland, where European brown bears suffering a similar fate in reduction of numbers due to hunting and deforestation. At the extremes of the north and south, the polar bears and their prey are suffering. This little polar bear now needs to walk 50 kilometres to the sea ice, which is hopefully there to allow her mother to hunt for the first time in 6 months. There's some successes, particularly around the UK in the marine and sea life habitat management. The grey seal numbers in the UK have increased significantly, hopefully allowing them to relax a little bit. In this case, take a little bit of a power nap at the bottom of the sea while I was bobbing around in my wetsuit. Reintroduction of species. There are many species around the world that unfortunately become extinct, but are still present elsewhere, so can be reintroduced, but need support and policy to do that. And in this case, the European beaver in the UK. And of course, what's next as we step towards through this conference to the next big conference, which is COP26, the UN Climate Change Conference up in Glasgow. Hopefully, imagery will make people stop, think, and care a little bit, be it the presidents and prime ministers of countries or the industry that is currently damaging the world. And I think images like these and like yours convey a message. So please keep on taking photographs, keep on getting a little bit better. And you never know, I might bump into you out in the field one day. But I'll hand over to Oliver now for his introduction.
Hello there, I'm Oliver Sherratt. I'm Head of Environment at Durham County Council, and I'm also absolutely delighted to be one of the judges for the photography competition. I've been invited to say a few words about my own photography, and then also highlight what we were looking for as judges as part of the assessment of the array of wonderful photographs that we've seen. So firstly, just to highlight some from my own photography. As Head of Environment, you'd expect that I'd be interested in environmental matters, and of course I am. But going out to landscapes and nature like this as a photographer helps me to express some of the joy and the love that I have for the beauty of nature. Like this field, for instance, in County Durham, where you get a wow factor of coming along and seeing all of the blooms, and you want to capture just some of the spirit of that experience that you have. And as a photographer, the more that you get into it, the more you understand that it isn't just about the wildlife. It's the changing nature, the seasons, the sky, the patterns of weather, all combine to actually make a strong photograph. So whilst it's great to see awesome scenes like you've got in front of you here in Iceland, all around us, much closer to home, there's individual stories that are going on in relation through to characters like this tree, for instance, you know, surviving against the elements, or indeed this dragonfly, marvelously engineered to be able to equip it to hover amongst the reeds and the sedges. And the concern that I have also as a photographer is that many of these things that we take for granted could actually be impacted by climate change. Indeed, it's pretty much a certainty unless we do things. Now, I said at the outset that I'd highlight a couple of things as judges that we were looking for. The first is that whilst there's a number of really good photographs there, the number one thing that we're actually looking for is photographs that fit with the theme of climate change. And if it really chimed with that, then we had a second and a third look. And indeed, the second thing is that, yes, once it's chimed with that theme of climate change, the other element that we did as judges is to actually look at, does that photograph draw you in? Or does that photograph actually tell a story or give an emotional impact? What you'll be hearing next is a description of many of those photographs, and you will see the sort of difficult job that we had as judges, because many of them actually hit the mark perfectly. I'll be giving a very short piece after this when we've finished, just really to highlight amongst a really good bunch those that we've selected to highlight for commendation, or for those that actually win the competition, together with a short collective message for everyone. So that's it for now. You'll be able to see the photographs now, hopefully, and I'll be returning in a few minutes' time. Thank you very much.
So fantastic pledges that are still coming through. It's so nice to have Ann Arbor here with us from the US. We've got a couple of pledges from a few people in their classes. So Ari promises to build a garden at home, and I'm sure that'll be filled with lots of lovely plants. And we're seeing pledges to turn off the lights more, which is a great action to take.
And now we're going back to Oliver and Brian, and they're going to do the announcement for the winners of our photo competition.
Well, hello again. If all has worked well, you should have seen a good selection of the photographs as part of the competition. And I'm sure you'll agree with me the job Brian Matthews and I had as judges was really difficult. So out of a good bunch, we will select now, and I've got the privilege in relation through to the County Durham entries to go through those. Firstly, in relation through to those that have been identified as images of concern. So if you just let me share the screen. And the first that we would highly commend is St. Joseph's of Ushermore. Clearly, the photographer here has gone to some trouble in relation through to really sort of adding the black and white imagery, the sepia sort of like tones that sort of bring out the dark nature of a concern. And this can be sort of like perhaps symbolized as a tree of life, as it were, that it's no good having the rubbish accumulated and the litter accumulated underneath it. So a really good sort of like photograph, not necessarily absolutely hitting the mark in relation through to climate change, which perhaps this does that little bit more. Selected not because I'm a Leeds supporter, but really a very commonplace issue that we have in relation through to our roads. A lot of congestion, a lot of perhaps unnecessary journeys as well if you've got walking and cycleways. And of course, we need to improve the amounts of electric and other low emission vehicles that we've got. So the runner-up was Belmont School for this traffic jam on the A1. And the winner, delighted to say, is Jake Dawson, Year 5 Winning, so like primary school. In my intro, I sort of highlighted that sometimes photographs don't have to be great big vistas and they're wonderful sort of like captures. They can be small, powerful and symbolic. And this one grabbed both myself and Brian, because this is the business end of the problems with emissions, and this is the area that needs tackling. So a really good summary of the concern, and well done, Jake. Celebrations here on the Infinity Bridge. The next is all on the positive side, and I've jumped through to this slide here, highly commended, a really good sort of like photograph in relation through to the clouds, looking through to the future as well as the stag is doing. Again, really sort of like very good. Just in terms of just slightly missing the mark in relation through to the climate change theme. This one does. Jake, again, well done to Jake. You've got some clear talent there. But he's used a photograph here to actually sort of to put in isolation the electric charging point. It's surrounded by other stuff, but your eye is drawn through to that centre. So it's a well composed photograph and giving some hope. It's not there, it's not straight away. It's a little bit in the distance. And with a drum roll for the winner, it's St. Joseph's at Ushermore. Not only have we got the heart symbol here, but we've actually also got a theme of growing your own, wasting less, and being positive all round, kinder to the planet, and kinder to ourselves. So well done to St. Joseph's, well done to all of the entries in this competition. I want to really sort of like give you and leave you with a thought that photography, albeit really, really strong and powerful, isn't everything. Sometimes we've actually got to do things as well and beyond this. This is me, a younger me, 30 years ago, in planting what was tiny sort of like baby trees. Probably the tree that I was, or the leaves that I was holding in my hand, are the very tree that I'm hugging 30 years ago. So across County Durham, we're planning to plant at least 69,000 trees by school children, not only within school grounds if there's room, but also across a number of different sites. And if you get the opportunity, if you can, ask your teacher and head teachers, grab it, because those will provide for you important memories and also provide that symbolism of contributing, doing our difference to making a positive future for us all. Photography is great. That's the first step in learning about our environment and building from there, and building a positive future, which I'm sure from the variety of photographs that I've seen will be the case. So thank you very much for the opportunity. Congratulations through to the winners, and enjoy the rest of the conference. Thank you.
And now we'll move on to the judging of the international schools, kicking off with the winner of Images for Concern, which was from Roman Barda National College. And this was one of several images that was submitted depicting and capturing the impact of the Romanian flooding, an extreme weather event that sadly are becoming more frequent as we impact climate change. We thought this image just conveyed a very strong message, and equally so the fact that the photographer was there in this flood, taking the image, trying to capture this really important moment. Well, I never advocate people put themselves in danger if it's safe to do so. Capturing images like this are fantastic. So well done to the 5th grade of Roman Voda. That, alongside a number of their other images, were thought to be really, really good. So well done. Moving on to a couple of highly commended images. This image from Danny over in El Salvador, capturing two problems. So industry and how we decarbonize that. And then of course, electricity and how we decarbonize that. And we thought putting the two together in a very simple but effective way was a really good climate change image. As we skip over to India now, we thought this image from the Nehru World School of a woman disposing of rubbish where many, many other people dispose of rubbish, captured a behaviour which we thought was really important to be discussed and reflected in this image. So 3 fantastic images that convey definite concern through extreme weather to decarbonisation, to how we manage our overuse and demand for food, plastic and other consumables. Brilliant images, well done. We'll close the competition, thankfully, with images of hope from the international schools. This shot by Vihan we thought was simple, to the point. We even stuck some words in there that conveyed the message, but the image does it all. The simple hug of a tree reminds us how connected we are to nature and how important it is. And as soon as we start damaging that, we damage ourselves. This was from the Jam Nabai Nasi school, and the highly commended image was also from the same school, this time from Joanna. A fantastic image and a good reminder to us all that ourselves or our families can do some simple actions to support and mitigate climate change. In this case, he's the family planting a tree, and they're going to do that once every month to make their little action complete. Fantastic image. Oliver particularly liked the watering can. So brilliant. I wish I was taking images like this when I was 11 and 12 years old. I'd be a much better photographer now. So that closes the photography competition. I hope you enjoyed that, and I'll hand back over to the conference.
Hi, welcome back. Well, the lucky winners of the photography competition from England are going to have an all expenses paid trip to COP on the 5th of November. Lucky them. Unfortunately, we can't be flying the winners of the international schools over to COP, so they're going to be getting some sustainable goodies through the post. Would just like to say thank you to David Saddington for organising the COP tickets, and thank you to Durham County Council and to the Durham Energy Institute for funding these fantastic prizes.
So we hope to use these and the other images that you submitted during the ECO2 Climate Conference in climate change exhibitions and within future educational materials. You can also see some of the pictures up on the ECO2 Smart Schools website. So your climate change hopes and concerns will continue to be shared with a worldwide audience.
We're now going to go over to your pledges, which have been coming in thick and fast. So thank you for that. There are some awesome pledges. And this little wordle that we've put on the screen for you is made out of some pledges that you made in the run up to this conference. So you're obviously all getting geared up beforehand.
So yeah, thank you again for submitting your pledges today. They've really inspired me, and I know I'll be doing some of the actions that you've suggested as well.
And we've got a real international flavour here. So just going to do a whistle stop tour. So from the USA, we have they're going to ride their bikes more often when they're going short distances. In India, they're thinking about reusing things like their textbooks, planting a tree on their birthdays, and planting a tree every time they use one box of 10 pencils, which we thought was really good and specific. In France, they're getting imaginative, and they're going to use a push mower rather than a petrol mower. And in the UK, they're going to put jumpers on rather than using their heating. And one I particularly like from St. Bede's in Lanchester, they're going to take cooler showers. And I like that because my daughter goes there. So I'm looking forward to the squeals in the morning.
And there was also one from Monty, who pledged to tell his whole village all about climate change, which I think is a fantastic action. So you can read more of the pledges submitted today by clicking on the speech bubbles with the question mark in on the chat and scrolling up and down.
And we'll be collecting all of your pledges on our website, so please keep coming them in, and we're going to be creating a whole page dedicated to your pledges. We're now going over to Rich Hurst, the Education Advisor for Sustainability, who is going to give you the opportunity to have your say on the issues that will be debated at COP26. Thank you.
Thanks, Joe. Thanks, Hannah. Thank you, everybody. I've had such a fantastic afternoon. It's been great to hear from everybody, and so pleased that so many of you have contributed to the questions and also to the pledges. Now we're on to another key part where we want to hear from you. So this is where we're going to do some polling. So I've added the direct link into the chat function. If you would like to click on that, it will bounce you out and take you to Slido. If you can't use that direct link, you can either do it from a phone, and you can simply go into your web browser, go to slido.com, slido.com. And then once you go to that website, there's a box at the top, and you put in the hashtag 677699. So that number is 677699. And we've got 3 questions that we would like you to answer, please. So I will start those rolling on my system so you can see them. So hopefully all of you have had the chance to be able to bounce across to Slido. So the first question is an open-ended question, so you can put as many answers as you like into this box. And the question says, what actions do you want your school to do to reduce carbon emissions, to benefit biodiversity, and to combat climate change? So please put those answers into the Slido box, please, rather than in the chat box, into that Slido link. What actions do you want your school to do to reduce carbon emissions, benefit biodiversity, and combat climate change? And the reason why we're asking that is we're trying to learn and want to hear from as many young people as possible, so that in my role working for Durham County Council, working for Education Durham, that I can go back to the County Council and say, these are the things that young people would like us to help schools to do. And therefore we want to try and help as many schools as possible within the County of Durham. But we're also really interested to know what is happening with schools and how we can try and help schools all around the world. So that's the first of the questions, please. I'm just going to give you another 30 seconds or so to answer that question. Remember that one again. What actions do you want your school to do to reduce carbon emissions, benefit biodiversity, and to help combat climate change? I can see them coming in now, so that's fantastic. 10 more seconds, folks. That's all I'm giving you. I'm making this very tricky. If only we had a little countdown, but we haven't got that bit working out. Okay, now I'm going to move on to the second question. Now this one is multiple choice. This one gives you 10 options, but you can only pick your top 3. So the question says, what should your local authority or municipality do to combat climate change? So what should your local authority do to combat climate change? And you can only pick the top 3 solutions or the answers. So the answers are, the options: more renewable energy, plant more trees, encourage cycling and walking, make trains and bus travel easier and cheaper, build buildings to be zero carbon, help people to reduce energy use at home, ensure that all waste is reduced, reused or recycled, help residents to conserve and reduce water use, help residents prepare for likely climate change impacts, and for the last one, enhance local green space for biodiversity and to enable more wild places. I can see my screen's going crazy there as they're moving backwards and forwards. I know you can't see that, but I can see all of this happening in front of me. What we're going to do is we'll collate all of the data, all of the answers and from you, both from this conference and from the conference that we did last week. And again, we'll put all of that information up onto the ECO2 Smart Schools website, so you'll be able to see what everybody has been responding with. And then I'm going to stop that one there. And then the final question, question 3, which I'll now start now, is another multiple choice question. This time you only get 2 choices two answers to pick. And the question is, what actions should your national government prioritise at COP26? What actions should they prioritise? And we've chosen those main themes that are going to be discussed at COP this year in Glasgow. So should they prioritise adaptation and resilience? So that's how do we adapt our societies to be able to cope with the likely effects of climate change? Should we focus more on safeguarding nature? Should we be looking at that energy transition? How do we move from more quickly to move from fossil fuels to renewable energy? How do we focus more on clean transport? And how do we look at finance to encourage cleaner financial systems that invest in new green jobs? So those are the choices. Again, my screen is going crazy. I can see all of those. I will give you 10 seconds to finish off before we head across to the close of the conference, which will be with my colleague Dave Ford. So I'll give you 5 seconds to finish off on question 3. And then I'm going to hand straight over to Dave, who's going to close the conference for us. Thank you.
I can't unmute.
Hello everybody, my name is Dave Ford and I'm the Vice Chair of OASIS. I've sat and really enjoyed this conference. I really didn't know what to expect, but I've been so excited by what I've heard. First of all, I'd like to thank you all of the schools that have attended, all of our experts, all of the people from OASIS that have organised the conference for such an incredible couple of hours. It's been really informative, really entertaining, really useful to me, and I hope that you've all enjoyed it. All of the contributions that you've made have been brought together and have been will be put either to the COP conference or put onto the ECO2 schools website for future use. One or two of the messages that have come through have really resonated with me, and particularly I've been fascinated by the concept that all of us can do our little bit to help to combat climate change, and that all of those little bits come together to make, in my opinion, what will become an irresistible force, both to persuade people what needs to be done, but also to make the changes for ourselves. Your images, your photographs, your pledges, and your answers to the Slido poll all demonstrate, I sat and watched the Slido poll build up as it went along, they all demonstrate how committed you young people are to making a difference. It is over to you. It's perhaps not fair that it's over to you because of what my generation has done, but it is over to you to force the world to change. I hope you've enjoyed this conference, and I hope that you can go ahead, fulfill your pledges and make a real difference. Thank you very much.